Today, I want to talk to you about some basic fall and spring management approaches to make sure that you can capitalize on your winter wheat crop. The optimum planting date for winter wheat in southwestern Ontario varies from region to region, but for the most part will land in the last 2 weeks of September and the first 2 weeks of October. Now for the most part, early planting usually isn't a huge concern, but there are sometimes isolated cases when early planting creates a nice lush wheat stand, and aphids are actually attracted to that wheat stand just like they are soybeans. And so when aphids come in and infect a wheat crop, they can actually spread the barley yellow dwarf virus, which can be fairly detrimental to wheat yield. For the most part though, when we talk about planting date and winter wheat, we think about the concern of planting too late. Planting too late can often cause the wheat crop to not quite have enough time to set a nice crown to survive the winter, and it also depletes the seed resources that it could otherwise live off throughout the winter. So what we're looking at here in this field is winter wheat that was planted very, very late. This winter wheat was planted November 22nd, so well past that last 2 weeks of September, first 2 weeks of October optimal time range. But really, when you look across this field, you actually do see a respectable winter wheat stand. And the reason why that's able to happen is because these seeds, they likely germinated and were able to set a decent, well-respectable root system last fall, but they didn't actually develop above ground like a normal winter wheat plant would. They likely threw a leaf or two last fall, and then they've completed a couple more leaves since then as the spring weather has come about. So when you look at one of these plants, all we're seeing here is 3 leaves. There's no tillers here to speak of, and that's again just because it didn't have the time last fall to develop. So it is possible to do. One advantage of planting this late is that you still can count on seed reserves to keep these wheat plants going through the winter. If you had too much top growth, which can actually be an issue with early planting, then seed reserves are lower, and that crown root, when you're getting to that end of October, you'll lose seed reserves and you'll have not quite the crown development that you need to survive the winter. So really, this is wheat that doesn't necessarily have a crown developed, but had a lot of seed reserves to get it through the winter. And so, for whatever reason, maybe it's late soybean harvest, or conditions weren't quite fit to plant wheat in that optimal time frame, you can still establish a very respectable soybean crop, wheat crop that is. This is a field that was planted roughly October 6th, and so right in that nice window, the optimal time for winter wheat planting. And so what we're seeing here is a lot of nice greening up in this field. They've noticed that the days are getting warmer and that there's more sunshine, and so you see this nice greenness to this field. And so this is the point where a lot of growers put an early application of nitrogen on. So right when things start greening up in the spring. And so what we're seeing here is, again, that nice October 6th planting date. What we're seeing here is a nice plant. The main shoot is here. Then there's 2 tillers coming off of it too. And so these plants survived winter very nicely. There's no real plant death here to speak of. They've all done very nicely and they're off to a nice start. So here's a field that was planted October 1st. And so as you can see, a very nice stand of wheat. A lot of these plants have 3 tillers on them, so they're coming along very nicely, and the crowns and the plants are actually starting to look even more upright. So they're getting to the phase where stems will even start to elongate. And that's when nitrogen demands are at the peak for wheat. Wheat as a grass crop is very responsive to nitrogen fertilizer. A lot of people apply it in the form of urea, 28%. And ammonium thiosulfate is now gaining a lot of steam for fertilizer. But for the most part, this field looks very good. Like I said, tillers are almost all complete here, and that this wheat will, given a bit more heat, will start to elongate pretty quickly. This winter wheat field was planted September 28th, and so still nicely in that optimum planting window. But what you can tell is that because it had more time to develop last fall, this growth stage is further along. You can tell that the crown development and the upright stature of the leaves and stems in these plants is further along than some of the other fields we've been to. And it won't actually be long until stem elongation starts on these plants. That'll be the next stage of development, and that's when nitrogen is really important for the developing crop. This field was actually sprayed with 28% nitrogen just today, and so it's right when it needs it. It's going to be requiring a lot of nitrogen in the next little while. Planting depth in winter wheat is just as important in this crop just as it is in something like corn and soybeans. And that depth is usually in that 1-inch range. And the reason for that is to make sure that all the seeds are going into a nice uniform seed bed that has adequate moisture for germination and seed to soil contact. And a couple other reasons is to avoid frost heaving. So when you have a nice crown at a good depth, it protects that plant from overwintering damage. And it also just allows for a plant to establish a nice root system. So what I have in front of me here is again another plant that has about 3 tillers. The crown is upright, so the next stage of this crop growth is stem elongation. But the reason for this is that you can actually see the seed down here. So what I see here is the seed and about a 1-inch gap between the seed and where the crown starts. And so you can tell that this plant was seeded about at the 1-inch depth. It has a nice root system. It's gathering nutrients very nicely, and it should be off to a great start here this spring. One of the best ways to manage high yielding winter wheat is through nitrogen application and nitrogen rates. Pioneer research has found that winter wheat can respond up to 140 pounds per acre of a nitrogen application. But it's important to understand that a nitrogen application of that rate, it's important to combine it with a fungicide application at the flag leaf stage. And the reason for that is just to make sure that to capitalize on that yield potential, the flag leaf and any funguses that are in the wheat canopy are controlled to make sure that that wheat crop can perform to its optimum level. Nitrogen rates are also very important just for determining yield. They create biomass, and so wheat with more biomass usually can result in higher yields. It's important to make sure that you look at the variety that you're planting when determining nitrogen rates. What we're looking at here in this field is 25R40, which in Pioneer's lineup is the wheat variety that's most suitable and best positioned for high levels of nitrogen application. And the reason for that is that R40 is a shorter statured wheat variety, and so it can respond nicely in yield to nitrogen while also making sure that lodging risk is minimal. Phosphorus is also a very important nutrient for winter wheat. The main way it gets applied to winter wheat is in the fall. So when this crop got seeded last fall with the drill, MAP was added to that mix, and so about 100 pounds of MAP went down with this crop. And so that should last and be sufficient for the phosphorus needs of this crop throughout the season. The spring of 2013 was really quite wet. One thing that we saw in a lot of fields this spring was areas that I'm sitting in right now. You can tell that behind me, you can actually see where the water level in this low part of the field actually stood. You can see the stubble sitting there and more green wheat in behind me. But right where I am, there's a bit more of a yellowish and brownish tinge to this wheat, and most of that is just because it was stressed out, and some of it was even drowned out by sitting water here this spring. One way to figure out and make sure that this wheat will pop out of this state is to just peel back some of the brown tissue. I have a plant here, about 3 tillers and 1 main shoot on this plant, and if you peel back some of the dead tissue, some of the leaf sheaths, you can actually get to and see the growing point. And on these plants, the growing point is still a nice firm white color. It's still a creamy color, and like I said, very firm. And so no real issue on the plant health of these plants. Once the weather starts to warm up, I think that these plants will pop out of this pretty quick. If you're unsure and some of the days are still staying quite cool, one of the things you can do is actually dig up some of these plants, put them in a pot, and even bring them indoors into a house that's about 22 degrees, and then you'll be able to tell a little bit quicker if these are going to pop out. So what you'll see is a couple more leaves, and you'll see them green up a little bit quicker, just so you can make a decision in a more timely fashion in the spring. So remember, making sure you focus on things like planting date, planting population, seeding depth, nitrogen rates, starter fertilizer rates will all get you to a nice roaring start with growing winter wheat. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, I'm Aric Boss.